All right, Sebastian Gorka on Fox and Friends this morning, former deputy assistant to the president, talking about these new allegations that we all seem to be talking about, how Hillary Clinton is said to have rigged the Democratic primary last year. President Trump seizing on the claims as well, saying Mrs. Clinton's actions were illegal and should be investigated. Let's bring our panel in. Richard Fowler, Fox News contributor, radio talk show host, joins us, as does Alexandra Smith, executive director of America Rising PAC and also former national chairwoman of the College Republican National Committee. And Alexandra, I'll start with you. The president has seized on this. Does that work politically for him, all this division in the Democratic Party, do you think?
I think it does, because if you think about Donald Trump's brand, it's one that's about shaking up the status quo. I think both parties early on in the 2016 cycle missed the anger. They missed the discontentment that was out there among Americans. I think that Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders were actually people who got that anger. And so I think what Donald Trump is doing right now is he's reminding Americans, he's reminding particularly Senate Democrats that are on the hook for several pieces of big legislation coming up. Look, the status quo didn't work in 2016. You came from a broken system, a broken party. Now's the time to join together and actually get things done.
Well, one of the ways he's reminding people, as we've come to expect, Richard, is he's taken to Twitter, has the president. This from yesterday. I always felt I would be running and winning against Bernie Sanders, not Crooked H, as he says, without cheating, and he says he was right. Now, there are wings, Richard, as you know, to the Democratic Party, as there are in the Republican Party, but in this case, we're talking about the Democrats. How about that Sanders wing of the party right now? Where do things stand?
Well, don't get me wrong. I think the Democratic Party has its growing to do, and I think there's going to be some moving and shifting in the Democratic Party. We saw it take place a couple weeks ago when the Democratic Party had its internal elections. But with that being said, Trump weighing into the Democratic Party politics only helps Democrats unite, right? Because one thing that unites Democrats is their not so, loving relationship for the President of the United States. And now I think the other problem that that is facing Republicans, why they shouldn't be sort of weighing into the Democratic Party politics, is the fact that they can't get their own party together. Remember, this president ran on repeal and replace Obamacare. You couldn't get that done. He also ran on tax reform. And if you think about their deadline, they have 25 legislative days left in this year. They're trying to get this tax reform bill done by Thanksgiving, which is a very, very tall order, seeing that it's so unpopular by so many different groups of people.
For the purpose of our discussion about elections, they do have the advantage of having a sitting president, which is very difficult to run against an incumbent. And to that point, we have the former campaign manager for Martin O'Malley. Remember when Martin O'Malley ran for president? Talking about what the Democrats are facing here. And this will be a big one, not only in 2020, but in the midterms. Listen.
We know that something that the DNC handled themselves inappropriately in 2016. That was addressed in the DNC chair race this year. And now it's important that we go ahead and focus on how we win in the elections on Tuesday and the elections in 2018. We certainly need to internalize the lessons.
Yeah, not as many. Well, the Virginia governor's race certainly would be one of the big ones. Not as many, Alexandra, big races on Tuesday. But to the midterms, let me ask you about that. And Richard, I want to come back and talk about 2020 in a moment as well. But what about the outlook for the midterm elections, given the division in both parties?
Well, look, I think in the 2018 midterms, Republicans undoubtedly start with an advantage. There are 10 Democratic senators up in states that Donald Trump won. In the coming battle for tax reform, I think that that's going to be a lot more difficult for Democrats to oppose than health care reform. I mean, it's going to be hard for a senator like Joe Manchin or Heidi Heitkamp or Joe Donnelly to go back to their constituents and say, no, I don't think that middle-class families get an extra $1,182.
They'll pay a price.
Absolutely. They're going to pay a price.
All right.
Well, I beg to differ on that. I beg to differ on that wholeheartedly, and I'll tell you why they're going to be able to go home to their constituents and say that the reason why they oppose it. It's because this tax bill repeals the student loan deduction. They're going to oppose it because this tax bill repeals the credit that teachers get for buying school supplies for their classroom. They could oppose it because this tax bill will basically allow for it repeals the estate tax while also repealing the tax for new home buyers. So
some of the opposition, I think, will depend on which state those
exactly,
absolutely.
Absolutely. But here's the larger problem that we have here. The reason this tax bill doesn't really need a Democratic vote. This tax bill needs Republicans to come together. And this president, for the past 11 months, has not been able to bring his party together.
Well, they can't
and that
lose
is a problem.
In the Senate.
Exactly. And that is a problem of this party. And that brings us to the midterm elections.
I want to get back. Well, I want to fast forward even further than that, for what it's worth, because you know what we were talking about, and Julie mentioned this earlier on our show, that it's been revealed apparently in this Donna Brazile book that there was talk, at least, about replacing Hillary Clinton on the ticket and replacing her with Joe Biden. A combination, they say, of Joe Biden and Cory Booker, the New Jersey senator, was talked about. Alexandra, you first, then Richard. What about in 2020? If you had to guess, who's Donald Trump going to be running against, assuming that he runs for re-election?
I think that the 2020 Democratic primary field exemplifies the divisions that are in the party right now. You have lines being drawn on extreme issues like single payer, for example, and senators like Elizabeth Warren and Kamala Harris and Cory Booker tripping over themselves to see who can run the farthest to the left. Right. You already have you have Democratic politicians that are being pushed out for seeming to be too moderate. So there's going to be a huge field.
The wings, right? That's going
to divide resources.
Right.
Yes,
what do you think,
absolutely.
Richard? Which side of the party, Elizabeth Warren also, which side of the party is favored? I know it's early, but who comes out ahead in this?
I think the key word is, you're right, it's way too early. Yeah. And I think you have to also look at what's happening on the Republican side of the aisle. I think you have a lot of Republican retirements happening. I think you have the ability for there to be a Republican primary. John Kasich has sort of signaled that he might run. I think you have a pending Russia investigation where there's been 2 indictments and 1 guilty and 1 person pleading guilty. All of these play into how the Democratic election how the Democratic primary will go, because you can't look at the Democratic primary in a vacuum without looking at what happens with his presidency and what happens with his agenda.
We'll still need a candidate, though. Richard and Alexandra, thanks to both of you. Good discussion.
Good to see you.
All right.
Thanks for having us.
So, with just days remaining in the campaign, a new poll shows a deadlocked battle for governor in